Week 6 fantasy football sleepers. We're talking about players that you can stream, and we're talking about players that you can stash. It's week 6. It's time to get some W's. We have multiple teams on bye weeks this week. This week, we are looking at Kansas City, the LA Rams, the Miami Dolphins, and the Minnesota Vikings on bye weeks. So we want to be sharp with our streaming decisions, and we want to be even sharper with the players that we choose to stash. I'm Theo Gremminger from Player Profiler. I got you covered every week with your sleepers, your streamers, and your stashes. For some of you, this video is going to help you fill out that lineup. I'm going to give you a couple of low-rostered options that you can plug and play. Last week, we had Darius Slayton. A lot of people missed on that one. Last week, we had Tank Bigsby. A lot of people missed on that one as well. Last week, we had Tyrone Tracy. People were on that one, but it was still nice to hit. We've had a bunch of hits this year. We're going to look to hit once again. Let's start at the quarterback position. QB is light. And a quick reminder, the threshold that I'm using for what a sleeper is players that are rostered in no more than 30% of leagues. So a lot of sleepers content out there is going to tell you all these guys, and you're going to be like, my league is competitive. I'm not able to even find those guys on the wire. They're already rostered. Hopefully today I'm giving you a couple names that are still available to you. And we'll start out at the QB position. And we're going to talk about Danny Dimes. We're talking about Daniel Jones. And Daniel Jones right now is QB 13 on the season. He's coming off of a big win over Seattle without Malik Nabers. He's going to be without Nabers again this week. Nabers is still in the concussion protocol. We really need Malik Nabers back in our lineups. But even without Malik Nabers, this is a fun one for fantasy football. The Cincinnati Bengals have been getting cooked. They got fried, cooked, whatever you name it. This defense is giving up points galore. Cincinnati has conceded a top three points per game number. Right now, they are the number 2 easiest defense to score on, averaging 29 points per game allowed. This is a defense that Lamar Jackson just passed for 4 touchdowns on. This is a defense that Jaden Daniels absolutely shredded a few weeks back in primetime on Monday Night Football. So obviously, Danny Jones is a significant decrease from Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels. But for our purposes, we're not asking him to qualify for a QB1 finish. We're asking him to finish inside of the QB1 line. Danny Jones is QB 13 on the season, so he's knocking on the door. The offensive line is much improved. This was the worst offensive line in football last year, one of the worst offensive lines in history last year. This year, Jones is getting the protection he needs. The Giants are not even in the top 10 in terms of sacks allowed after almost setting the all-time record last year. So they've improved there. He's getting a little bit more protection, and they're utilizing Wan'Dale Robinson. He's getting over 25% target share. He was in our sleeper show earlier in the year. Now he's rostered everywhere. But Darius Slayton played so well last week. So he has those 2 wide receivers going up against a leaky secondary. We should get some more Tyrone Tracy. One thing about Danny Dimes is we've seen him have an 800-yard rushing season. So we know that's in his back pocket. 800 rushing yards for a quarterback in the NFL is a really good number. So Daniel Jones might have been 700. I got to double check that one. But he had a big-time rushing season 3 years ago. When the Giants when we're talking about the last time the Giants made the playoffs, Daniel Jones finished as a top 10 quarterback that season. When he gets Malik Nabers back, that's not outside of the realm of possibility. So I'm scooping him up. I'm using Danny Dimes in a real big spot in a single QB league. I'm also using him in a real big spot in a super flex league myself this weekend. Talking about Drake Maye. Drake Maye makes his NFL debut this weekend. Drake Maye is available in 94% of leagues. Nobody wants Drake Maye. And I can understand why. He is facing off against CJ Stroud in kind of like a cool subplot. You've got last year's best rookie quarterback against a rookie quarterback that the New England fan base is ecstatic about. There's a lot of issues, though, here, like a lot of issues. The Patriots cannot score. They're dead last in the league in team points per game. They only score 12.5 points per game. They've also allowed the second most sacks in football with 19 sacks allowed. So they can't protect, they can't score, and they don't have these weapons sort of elevating everyone. This is not an ideal situation for a rookie quarterback to succeed in. But Drake Maye has some positives that we can get excited about as fantasy managers. He's got a very big arm, and he has size. And the most exciting aspect about his game for us as fantasy managers is his ability to run, his scrambling ability. At UNC, he rushed for over 1,200 yards, and he led the team in rushing yards in a season in the ACC. Like, that's significant for a quarterback to lead the team in rushing yardage. So I expect Drake Maye to have a number of designed runs, and also to, when the going gets tough, put his head down and run. So quarterbacks who have done that for us early in their careers have sort of beat expectations in terms of their fantasy scoring projections. So Drake Maye is sort of the speculative ad, and that's really it for the quarterback position. Every other quarterback that is worth mentioning as a sleeper this week is way, way, way above our threshold for scoring. So I'm not going to really dive into some of the Aiden O'Connells, the Spencer Rattlers. I think you can avoid those guys. Danny Dimes is your streamer. Drake Maye is your quarterback to stash. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to cover running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, sleepers, streamers, and stashes.
Say what you want about fantasy football. You can't say it's not a game of skill. My favorite game of skill during the NFL season, these underdog pick'em contests. You pick 6, you can win 100x your payout. Just pick a game, one game, just one game. Stack that game. Think week 1, Vikings-Giants. Joe Schoen, he doesn't know what he's doing. I watched Hard Knocks. Daniel Jones is what we thought he was. Less than on Daniel Jones. Less than on Malik Neighbors. Less than on Devin Singletary. And Sam Darnold, better than advertised. Sam Darnold, more than. Justin Jefferson, more than. Aaron Jones, more than. Boom, 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 boom. 100 extra payout on Underdog right now. Use promo code Underworld. You get a 50% deposit bonus up to $250. So they've raised the maximum bonus from $100 to $125. You put in $250, you get $125 in bonus cash. Who doesn't love that with promo code Underworld? Now go start picking.
Welcome back. We're talking about fantasy football sleepers, streamers, and stashes for your fantasy football roster. I'm Theo Gremminger. Let's keep this thing going. Let's talk about wide receiver. Wide receiver is our most fun position to talk about this week. And we have one player that I'm going to mention who is past our threshold for roster percentage, but he's close enough that it's like a PSA. If you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to this on a podcast, go ahead and pause and go make sure he's not available in your league, because Jalen Tolbert is still available in 68% of leagues, which is a little crazy because he just had a tremendous game on Monday Night Football. The Dallas Cowboys beat Pittsburgh, close game, and Tolbert sets a career high with 21.7 PPR points, 7 catches, 87 yards, and a touchdown. And this is not like a complete out of nowhere game for him. This is now 3 out of 4 weeks where Tolbert has scored at least 13 PPR points. So he's starting to heat up a little bit. This is also an offense where he doesn't have a ton of target competition. It's a lot of CeeDee Lamb. Jake Ferguson is locked in. He's a weekly impactful tight end start. And then you've got Tolbert and Rico Dowdle. That's pretty much it for this offense. Brandon Cooks, of course, is injured. And this is a Dallas Cowboys team that is facing the Detroit Lions in a game that could tilt over. This is a 50-plus point total. The total will end up being somewhere around 53 points by the time you listen to this pod or watch this video, maybe higher on Sunday. I'm recording this one on Saturday morning. So make sure Jalen Tolbert is not available in your league. Let's talk about a player to stash. Unlike Tolbert, this player is not going to go right in your lineup, but it's one that we want to add to our rosters and see where this thing's going. This week, we saw Michael Pittman have rumors that he was going to go to the IR. He's going to apparently play through this one, but it's a back injury that held him out of practice. Josh Downs, who we talked about for weeks and weeks as a waiver wire ad and on our sleeper show, but is now rostered everywhere because he's playing fantastic. I hope you added Josh Downs. I know I did. This is a player that toe injuries, like, we don't know the severity of it, but it's something that we want to keep in the back of our heads. If Josh Downs doesn't look quite as effective running routes, or maybe has a reduced routes run in this next game compared to last week, then maybe we'll say maybe the toe really was bothering Downs. But anyway you cut it, was limited this week with that. So we're talking about Adonai Mitchell. Alec Pierce is rostered in too many leagues, but Adonai Mitchell was a player that this coaching staff still really likes. Reggie Wayne highlighted Mitchell this week, mentioned him as a player that they want to see an expanded role with, and talked about how, like, he's doing everything right. Second round pick for the Colts. Let's stash him on our benches and just see where this thing goes. Maybe he's a guy that we might be able to use in week 8. And if this like in the second half of the season, and if this Michael Pittman injury holds him out and he can't play through it, Mitchell will be an interesting one. And check for Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce is one that is a massive boom bust guy, but he has 3 touchdown catches and almost 400 receiving yards this year. So Alec Pierce rostered in too many leagues to really dive into, but he's definitely worth a scoop based on this Pittman injury he's dealing with. Darius Slayton, we're going back to the well. We talked about it last week. How are we not going to talk about Darius Slayton after he had his career high last week when we recommended him as a emergency sleeper to use in your lineup? That was a fun one. We had Juwan Jennings a couple weeks ago. We had Darius Slayton. Like, when you're talking about players at this level, we got to celebrate when we have one that really, really hits, because a lot of these guys are emergency starts. We know what we're looking to get into. But last week, Slayton was fantastic. 26.2 PPR points, 8 catches, 122 yards, and a touchdown. New York gets a big win as a underdog against Seattle. They're going to need it this week against these Bengals. But these Bengals are top 10 in yardage allowed to wide receivers and receptions allowed to wide receivers. So top 10 in yardage allowed and receptions allowed to wide receivers. I had somebody ask me this question in the article I write for The Athletic, and it was, would you start Wan'Dale or Darius Slayton this week? That's not really a consideration for most of you, because most of you guys, Wan'Dale has been in your lineup and he's probably starting for you if you're in a competitive league right now. But for me, the answer is Wan'Dale is the floor play. 100% Wan'Dale is going to give you that weekly floor. Darius Slayton, though, does have a ceiling outcome here against a defense that, again, has been getting absolutely shredded by opposing wide receivers and opposing quarterbacks. So Slayton is still somewhat of a boom bust guy, but you could be backing him on a heater. One wide receiver that I have probably as a wide receiver 4 this week, I'm probably a little bit ahead of consensus on him, is Michael Wilson. Michael Wilson's available to you in 85% of leagues. This is a player that is in his second year. We've talked about him on my waiver wire show. We've talked about him here on our sleeper show. But Wilson is a player, like, if you're in a spot this week, you can throw Wilson into the flex. I feel not fantastic, but again, you know what you need on your team based on some of these injuries, based on some of these teams on buys. Wilson has scored 12.8 points or more in 2 out of his last 3 games. Wilson also has more receptions this year than Marvin Harrison Jr. This is a game where Green Bay and Arizona, to me, this game could tilt over. This is a game where also you could get positive game flow, where if Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers are really, really cooking, it's going to cause Kyler Murray to have to put the pedal to the metal, take more shots. Marvin Harrison Jr., he could have a really great game this week, but we don't want to ignore his teammate across from him playing on the outside in Michael Wilson. You can treat him as a streamer or as a stash. One player we want to stash for this week, and this is like a forgotten one, but Xavier Legette in week 4 had 6 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown. This past week, he gets banged up, but now, and he plays minimal snaps. We saw like Jalen Coker produced. This was a weird game for Carolina, but now Xavier Legette is back. and he's going up against the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Xavier Legette is certainly no Mike Evans, but Mike Evans did just have 2 touchdown catches. So the Atlanta Falcons secondary allowed 2 touchdown catches to an outside wide receiver. How about 1 for Xavier Legette as a sleeper this week? And any way you cut it, Legette was a guy who bounced to a higher roster percentage, and then a lot of people cut him last week. It seems like a punishment cut for a guy who got banged up slightly, but he's back this week. So I would guess we're going to see a few more games like Legette's week 4 on the horizon. Maybe it could be this week. Anyway you cut it, stash Xavier Legette. A desperation streaming options, 2 of them. Rashod Bateman, available in 90% of leagues. He had a touchdown catch last week. And Bateman faces a Washington Commanders secondary that has allowed 10 touchdown catches to opposing wide receivers this year. So maybe Bateman can find the end zone once again. And if you're in a bind, chasing the Washington-Baltimore game is not the worst idea. These 2 teams are number 1 and number 2 in team points per game. So Bateman is a dart throw flex. Another very deep option, depending on your league. Some of you are in 20-man roster leagues, in leagues like FFPC, NFFC, and you're hurting. Xavier Hutchinson could be this year's Noah Brown. And if anybody watched my shows last year, watched my waiver wire last year, Noah Brown was a guy that we were aggressive to get when he had his opportunity, and then he continued to deliver. It was a short-lived run, but Noah Brown gave us multiple weeks of like high-end production in this CJ Stroud-led offense. This year, Noah Brown's off the team. Why is Noah Brown off the team? Because of Xavier Hutchinson. They liked Xavier Hutchinson enough that they were willing to move on from the veteran Noah Brown and go with their younger player. Xavier Hutchinson was a 7th-round pick in the 2023 draft. He had an 80-plus reception season at Iowa State, and then he had a season at Iowa State where he had 107 catches in the Big 12. He also has the size at 6'3", 210 pounds. So he was an elite college producer. He has the size, and it seems to me like he's going to be on the field in 3 wide receiver sets. It's going to be Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, and now Xavier Hutchinson. So Hutchinson should have some advantageous matchups coming up. We'll see if he can produce, but lightning could strike twice. You could have some usable weeks with Xavier Hutchinson. He is probably a stash, but if you're in desperate mode, he'll be on the field a lot this weekend against New England for the Houston Texans. Running backs. Let's talk about Tyler Johnson and Ray Davis. Tyler Johnson, these Buffalo Bills backup running backs. Tyler Johnson is available in 97% of leagues. Ray Davis available in 90% of leagues. Why are we talking about them? Because James Cook looks like he's going to miss Monday Night Football. So James Cook may miss Monday Night Football against the Jets. And there's some rumors that James Cook could miss like 2 or 3 weeks. So you're going to have an opportunity for Johnson or Davis to be used in your lineup. Now, you guys know that I'm a big Ray Davis fan. I liked him during the draft process. I have recommended him as a waiver wire addition, and I have talked about him on this show as like a stash. Ray Davis was a 4th-round pick, did sort of everything you'd want to see as a collegiate. He had 2 1,000-yard rushing seasons in the SEC. He also caught a lot of passes, scored a bunch of receiving touchdowns last year at Kentucky. Seemed like a like-for-like replacement for James Cook. And if you look at over the last 3-week period, Ray Davis has had way more opportunities collectively over the last 3 weeks. But Johnson had more touches last week. I don't know if this is a trend. Johnson, again, is a veteran. He's bounced around a little bit. He can catch the football. Ray Davis seems a little bit more like a like-for-like. If James Cook is out, then you can use either of these guys. I would venture that if the game flow dictates and Buffalo's in control, it's going to be Ray Davis. If it's a close one and the Bills are really struggling, you could see a little more Ty Johnson as a receiver. So for me, I'm hoping that we get a clear winner here, there's a possibility that this could be a true split, but the Joe Brady offense in Buffalo has been so like productive for the running back position. We've seen what James Cook's done this year, that both of these guys have a lot of value. You could scoop both if you have the room, scoop at least one to see where this goes. Scooping one, you might end up with a running back 2 option when we're heading into week 7. So I feel very strongly about make sure get a Buffalo Bills running back on your roster, see where this thing goes. I have more Ray Davis, but I actually have been adding Ty Johnson as well throughout the year. So I have a little more exposure to Ray Davis, but I am comfortable rostering both of these players. Sorry to be confusing on that one, but I think there is some confusion in the way the touches will be dispersed. Roschon Johnson, available in 74% of leagues, Chicago Bears. They've effectively phased out Khalil Herbert. You have DeAndre Swift playing fantastic. DeAndre Swift plays about 2/3 of the snaps. Roschon plays 1/3 of the snaps. But that hasn't stopped him from putting up solid fantasy numbers. He's scored at least not 8.6 points in 3 straight games, and he has 3 rushing touchdowns over the last 2 weeks. This is a player that needs to be rostered. If DeAndre Swift were to miss time, Roschon Johnson would be an auto start. And depending on your team needs, Roschon Johnson in a game against a soft Jacksonville defense could be a guy, if you're in a jam, that you put into your flex or your RB2 spot. He could get you double-digit fantasy points. Make sure you roster him if he's available in your leagues. Clear, handcuff, and also he is an effective receiver. We love adding handcuff running backs that can catch the ball. That's how you get situations that are really safer starts for you when the starter goes down. We all saw what happened with Trey Sermon last week. Trey Sermon was not great, but Trey Sermon was able to catch the football and he scored a touchdown. All of a sudden, we get a big scoring outcome. Trey Sermon, obviously, too rostered to discuss on this show, but the receiving helped him a ton. Let's talk about Tyler Allgeier and let's talk about Justice Hill. So you have Tyler Allgeier available in 72% of leagues, Justice Hill available in 74% of leagues. These guys are probably stashes for a lot of you, but if you're in a complete jam, both of these teams have very good matchups that could tilt over. So chasing the RB2 in Baltimore, Justice Hill, is chasing some of those receptions. This looks like a layup game for Derrick Henry. Washington allows a tremendous amount of rushing yards, but if Washington puts a ton of pressure on the Ravens and they score a lot of points, maybe the game flow dictates that Baltimore's going to have to go into their hurry-up mode, which means a lot more Justice Hill. Justice Hill, consider him an RB3, though, in this high-scoring game. Tyler Allgeier, way more difficult to trust, but the Atlanta Falcons have a great matchup against Carolina this week. The Falcons scored a ton of points against Tampa Bay. They're going to look to keep that thing going against a Carolina team that has allowed like 3 30-point games this year. So looking at Justice Hill and Tyler Allgeier as high-end stashes for your roster, if Derrick Henry or Bijan Robinson were to go down, both of these players would be instantly top 15 running backs on the week. Let's talk about another three running backs, and these ones are stashes for you, not guys you're putting in your lineup. Trey Benson, available in 80% of leagues. Blake Corum, available in 84% of leagues. And Emmanuel Wilson, available in 89% of leagues. Arizona, LA Rams, Green Bay Packers. If the starters ahead of them went down, all 3 of these players would be massive FAAB additions. And to clarify something, when we're talking about Emmanuel Wilson, you've got Marshawn Lloyd on the horizon. That's going to be problems for him when Marshawn Lloyd comes back, but Lloyd is still banged up. Amari DiMercato has been playing ahead of Trey Benson. But for me, if James Conner went down and you're self-scouting, Trey Benson gives you a lot more as a runner than DiMercato does. This would be one where Trey Benson would receive all the rushing work and DiMercato would work in as a receiver and like a change of pace back. So Benson would be the more valuable one. And Corum, I don't need to tell you how valuable the RB1 spot is in LA. If Kyron Williams missed time, Blake Corum would be an instant top 15 option at the running back spot. He's passed Ronnie Rivers by, but Blake Corum incredibly successful at Michigan, can handle a high volume of touches, and they draft from the third round. So all three of these guys are ideal stashes for you. And this time of year, we want to stash as many guys as possible. One deep sleeper for this week, Tyler Goodson, available in 98% of leagues. Jonathan Taylor out. And we talked about Trey Sermon. Trey Sermon was a little bit banged up this week, and Trey Sermon led the Colts in scoring at the running back spot by a high margin, but he wasn't that efficient. Maybe you see a little more Tyler Goodson this week. I think this situation's a little bit more fluid long-term than some people would. So that's more of a stash/desperation one. Goodson is going to get some work this week. Very, very light week at tight end. Our stash, and one that you should go out and pick up right now if you have room on your roster, Colby Parkinson. He is available in 82% of leagues. The Rams are on a bye week this week, so you can't use him, but he's trending up. He's been targeted 20 times over the past 2 games. And I think he has a chance to finish as a low-end tight end 1 this season. This is a player where he actually could benefit from Cooper Kupp coming back. He won't see 13 targets again like he did last week, but it's going to make the overall offense better to have an alpha wide receiver out there. And Parkinson is locked in. He plays like every snap. Zach Ertz is your streamer for this week. He is available in 74% of leagues. He did nothing last week, but Zach Ertz was targeted 8 times. And the Ravens have also been very generous to opposing tight ends. They are one of the worst teams right now at defending the tight end position. And again, like we talked about with Justice Hill and we talked about with Rashod Bateman, chasing this Washington-Baltimore game, if you're in a bind, we could potentially get a 30-28 type game with a lot of fantasy numbers, of high fantasy numbers. And there's also a chance Baltimore could completely put it on Washington. They're a sizable favorite. And again, this could be a Derrick Henry game. If that's the case, Zach Ertz could be a garbage time guy for you. 2 stashes at the tight end position. Talking about Erick All. Erick All is in this weird split with Mike Gesicki, but All is out snapping him and he's running more routes. Stash him, see where it goes in the second half of the year. And 1 deep stash, we talked about Zach Ertz doing nothing with 8 targets. If he keeps getting a lot of targets and he keeps doing nothing with them, then we have to start talking about Ben Sinnott. Ben Sinnott is buried right now on the depth chart in Washington, but Ben Sinnott was the second-round pick of the Washington Commanders. So this is a situation to keep an eye on. I'm Theo Gremminger. If you enjoyed this, make sure you're subscribing to the podcast version, Sleepers, Streamers, and Stashes. You can get that right here at Player Profiler Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts. And make sure you're tuning in for videos like this, for podcasts like this. We've got you covered on everything you need to crush your leagues this season. We will see you next week, and let's get that W here in week 6.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.